Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal here with Colin Levy and Kim Strassel. Let's turn to the elections on Tuesday in Wisconsin for the Supreme Court swing seat and Chicago, both with national implications as well as a local consequence. Brandon Johnson narrowly defeated Paul Vallas for mayor of Chicago. Huge victory, Colin, for the Chicago Teachers Union and public unions nationwide that poured millions into the race. Something of an upset, 51-49. Vallas had led the race for the most part. Let's listen to Johnson.
You know, they said this would never happen. So, you know, if they didn't know, now they know.
Colin, how do you do it?
Whew. Well, it's very disappointing, Paul. I think it was definitely a major upset. And I think, there was obviously a panoply of factors in play here. I do want to note some numbers that I did see this morning on Chicago is that turnout was just appallingly and surprisingly low. Chicago's got about 1.5 million registered voters, and there were just over 500,000 ballots cast in Tuesday's election. So that's about 35% participation, which is, especially shoddy considering the stakes for the city on crime and on education and on other issues. And, I'd remind everyone, too, that Chicago has a total population of around 3 million. So that's really low. It did rain here, but I think there's no question that when you have reduced turnout, which I think in many places levels like that would probably be called voter suppression. When you have a turnout like that, it immensely benefits special interests, and especially organized ones. That clearly benefits the Chicago Teachers Union, which has good efforts for voter mobilization, and they were certainly able to get out the vote for Brandon Johnson. So I think everyone was surprised by how things went last night for Paul Vallas, who was leading in the polls beforehand.
I mean, it's not too much to say that Johnson is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Chicago Teachers Union. He's a former organizer for them, county commissioner now. But, he didn't have a chance until they backed him, number one, and got him across the line in the final two from the primary, and then poured all this money in. And not just the Chicago Teachers Union, but the National American Federation of Teachers poured in money. The SEIU, the National Public, it's a national public union, very strong public worker union. And Johnson believes in higher taxes to redistribute to voters. He believes you fight crime with social programs, not police. He opposes charter schools and any reform. So that's what Chicago has now voted for, Kim.
Yeah, and I think that helps explain why we see these outside groups like the American Federation of Teachers increasingly playing in these local elections, because they want to try to send the message that their priorities, their social priorities, are being validated by the voting public. So they come in and spend a ton of money. And you're now going to hear Democrats and progressives on the left saying that this goes to show that the public is still behind our criminal justice reform agenda, which involves further defunding the police and putting more money into these social programs. As you say, they're going to claim that this means that Democrats are doing a better job in these cities dealing with crime, even though that's obviously not the case as shown by statistics. I think this is going to be the other big consequence of the Johnson victory, which is not only are the teachers unions now going to be in charge, they're going to be sitting on both sides of the bargaining table. My eyes are already watering at the think of the cost of that next contract and what's going to happen with their pensions. But the other consequence of this is going to be citizens and businesses that are going to witness more crime. I can imagine that there are a lot of companies right now that are potentially going to follow in the wake of those that have already evacuated Chicago.
I like the word evacuate there.
Yep. Emergency evacuation. So, this is a really consequential victory. And the real pity of it, as Colin was saying, is it would have been done by a very small fraction of voters in the city. And I think Chicago is just very unfortunate. This used to be the city that was called the city that works. And we are very far from that now.
I worked in Chicago as a young reporter. I still love the city, and I remember it fondly as a place to work. And, of course, Colin, you've lived in the city and now live in the suburbs. So it's a real shame. I guess we're going to get to see how Johnson does here, turning this into a progressive hothouse experiment. All right, let's turn to Wisconsin. And the contest for the Supreme Court. It's 4-3 majority that has been for 15 years, a center-right majority. Not always fully conservative, but center-right. And retiring Republican appointee created an opening in the special election where Janet Protasiewicz, the Democrat, defeated Dan Kelly, the Republican. And the surprise, not so much that she won, Colin, but just the magnitude of it. More than 55% of the vote. That's a huge margin in a state that's considered to be a swing state and has been narrowly divided in state house races. I just mentioned a couple of details that shocked me. Protasiewicz, the Democrat, won both Brown and Outagamie counties in the mid-state around Green Bay and Appleton. You're a Republican, you lose those counties, and you got no shot at winning statewide. And her margins in the Milwaukee suburbs, she really cut into what have to be big Republican margins in the Milwaukee suburbs as well.
Yeah, she really did win by a resounding margin. And, as we've discussed before, she really did it using some pretty dirty tricks and dipping deep into the bag of talking about politics. She made a lot of her campaign about abortion, even though that's certainly not generally standard fare for judges. But she went right out there and said that she supported a woman's right to choose. She targeted Wisconsin laws that she thought also might be appealing to talk about for Wisconsin Democrats, including saying that she thought that Wisconsin's Act 10, which limited the ability of public sector unions to collectively bargain, she said that that was unconstitutional. She said that the state legislative maps were rigged. And she was doing all of this with backing, with money that was from out of state. I mean, she had enormous millions of dollars of money coming from the West Coast, coming from the East Coast, and all of these liberal donors who I don't think really care all that much about Wisconsin or its politics were pouring money in because they were hopeful that when they could get her on the court, she could work on the legislative and the congressional maps that they see as so important. So it was really very cynical. She used the abortion issue to sort of goose up support from swing voters and, as you say, from these swing counties. And she was doing it really in the interest of people who were most interested in how they could affect the legislative maps going forward.
Yeah, what was striking about this race is, particularly from the Protasiewicz's point of view, is that she framed these issues you were talking about not as legal matters, but as public policy issues. She ran almost like a governor or a senator and made clear, for example, against Act 10, that's Scott Walker reform, that not only did she think it was unconstitutional, but that she had marched against it. And despite the fact that the Supreme Court has already ruled on its constitutionality and said it is constitutional, 5-2 majority, she did not pledge to recuse herself from a case if she gets another case challenging its constitutionality again. Remarkable stuff from a judge. It just goes to show you where our judicial politics have gone. And it's not a good turn because I think this will undermine faith in the justice system. But Kim, let's talk about the electoral political trend in Wisconsin, because it's been moving against the Republicans in the suburbs since the start of the Trump era, made up for in part from some stronger Republican support in rural areas. But boy, oh boy, it's really moving against Republicans in some of these races. And I just point to one race from Tuesday, the 8th State Senate District, which is the northern Milwaukee suburbs. I know the area well. And the state senator there, Republican, it was an open seat, is holding on by only 500 votes. If you'd have told me a decade ago that the northern suburbs of Milwaukee would go for a Democrat or close to it, I would have told you no Republican will win statewide again.
Yeah, and we're seeing this nationwide too, Paul. And we're seeing it now replaying itself over a series of elections. We saw it in 2020. The lack of suburban support was a big reason that Donald Trump lost this election. We saw it in 2022 in terms of number of the candidates that he had endorsed for senator and for governor. Their losses very much were at the hands of suburban voters who had moved against the GOP. And I think there's a couple of things happening here. One is Donald Trump. He really does turn off a lot of voters who are in the middle, and that is a definition these days of a lot of those suburban voters. They often are more fiscally sound and are attracted naturally to some Republican positions, but they do not like the sight of Donald Trump and what he did to the presidency, his kind of boisterous nature. He has turned them off. So that is one thing. The other thing we are seeing, and Colin just touched on it, point is the urgent need for Republicans to get themselves a solid position on abortion and other social issues. This is what is driving turnout and also making those suburban voters defect from the GOP. And, what happened in Wisconsin is a great example. After the Supreme Court ruled to overturn Roe v. Wade, Wisconsin was a state that snapped back to a 1949 statute that basically outlaws abortion other than in the case of the life of the mother or child. And while it was unlikely that law would actually have been instituted in the state, enforced in the state, the GOP in the state did not move to amend the situation. And, you saw Protasewicz and Democrats really use that to their advantage and say, look, if we don't have someone on the Supreme Court that's going to deal with this, then you're going to be stuck under this regime. And we saw that happen as well previously in Michigan and Kentucky. So there's a lot of warnings out there to the GOP right now about what is happening. This is just the latest examples of it and a warning about what they need to think about as they go about their primary to elect a nominee and as state parties go about thinking about these social issues like abortion.
Basically, if you're a Democrat running for dog catcher in Wisconsin, you're running on abortion. I mean, it's almost literally true. They were running, the New York Times had a piece saying that the Green Bay mayor's race, the Democrat there, the incumbent, was running on abortion. He has nothing to do with abortion. But this is just the degree to which they think that drives turnout for Democrats. And I think the evidence is there. And if Republicans do not get a position that's coherent and defensible and closer to where the country is on abortion nationwide, or at least in these swing states, they're going to be in trouble in 2024. All right. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Colin, in particular, for covering the Wisconsin and Chicago races. Welcome to American politics back from Hong Kong. You get to cover all of the joys of these defeats that have been having. But tomorrow is another day. So thank you both. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back tomorrow, speaking of which, for another edition of Potomac Watch.